in the forgotten town of Atterbrook, a place whose name had all but faded from maps. The wind carried whispers. It was said that the dead did not sleep in Atterbrook. They wandered, restless and ravenous for attention. Some townsfolk believed it was the ground itself that was cursed. Others thought it was the strange way the moonlight never quite touched the town square. But no one dared speak about the shadows. The old Merrick house, perched at the edge of the town's dense forest, was the epicenter of the strange occurrences. Overgrown ivy clawed at its crumbling walls, and its windows were always dark, as though they swallowed all light. For years, no one had lived there, and for good reason. Its last inhabitants had vanished, leaving behind only their screams, or so the legend said. One autumn night, a group of teenagers from the nearby city, convinced the stories were nothing but folklore, dared each other to stay in the house until dawn. There were four of them: Jack, who loved to laugh in the face of fear; Amy, quiet but curious; Leo, who sought thrills to feel alive; and Harper, whose skepticism was her shield. They arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the house. The front door creaked open on its own, revealing a dust-coated interior. As they stepped inside, they were met with a silence so profound it pressed against their ears. The air was thick, like walking through a fog of dread. "See, nothing to worry about," Jack said, his voice echoing unnaturally. They settled in the parlor, lighting candles as the darkness outside became absolute. Time passed slowly, and though they joked and whispered, the house seemed to breathe around them. The shadows danced along the walls, but none of them noticed at first. It began with a faint whisper, just at the edge of hearing. "Did you hear that?" Amy asked, her eyes wide. They all paused, straining to listen. A soft, indistinct voice seemed to drift from the hallway. The words were impossible to understand, but the tone was chilling, like someone calling from far away. Leo smirked, standing up. "Probably the wind," he said, heading toward the hallway. "I'll check it out." He disappeared into the shadows, his footsteps echoing, then silence. Several minutes passed. He didn't return. Harper stood, her skepticism wavering. "This isn't funny, Leo," she called, but there was no response. Jack, always the brave one, took a flashlight and ventured after him. Amy clung to Harper, both of them straining to see anything beyond the dim candlelight. Jack's voice cut through the silence, but it was trembling. "Guys, come here. You need to see this." They hesitated, but fear of being alone drove them toward the hallway. There, just beyond the parlor, they found Jack standing rigid, his flashlight trembling in his hand, his beam pointed toward the floor. Lying there, in the dust, were footprints small, like those of a child, leading deeper into the house. But what chilled them to the core was that the footprints trailed through the walls, as though whatever made them had no regard for solid matter. "We need to leave," Amy whispered, her voice cracking. Just as they turned to retreat, the whispering returned, this time louder, more insistent. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the house seemed to shift unnaturally, stretching toward them. A figure appeared at the far end of the hallway, a small child, or at least something that looked like a child. Its eyes were hollow pits, and its mouth was stretched in a grotesque smile. Leo stumbled backward from behind them, his face pale, eyes wide. "We need to go now, he rasped, but when they turned back to the front door, it was no longer there. The house had shifted, sealing them inside. The whispers grew louder, overlapping with each other, as if the very walls were alive with voices, angry, pleading, mocking. Jack's flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that only heightened their terror. Shadows peeled away from the corners, stretching into grotesque figures that moved toward them. What is this?" Harper gasped, her skepticism completely shattered. The shadow figures circled them, their shapes shifting, sometimes human, sometimes not. And then the voices spoke in unison, a deep, guttural sound that reverberated through the very foundation of the house. "Stay. Forever." The lights went out. The last thing they saw before the darkness consumed them was the child's hollow grin, growing wider, impossibly wide, as if it could swallow their souls. When the morning sun rose, the Merrick house stood as silent as ever. No one knew what had happened to the teenagers. The only trace left was their abandoned car parked outside, and a new set of whispers that had joined the chorus of voices haunting the air in Atterbrook. But somewhere deep within the house, shadows moved. The children of the house were still playing their games, waiting for the next souls to join them, and they were never lonely for long. The disappearance of the 4 teenagers spread quickly through Atterbrook, though few dared speak of it openly. Those who lived in the town knew better than to linger on such mysteries. The Merrick house had always been a dark spot in their collective memory, a place where the living didn't belong. But one person refused to let it go, Anna, Jack's older sister. She had grown up in Atterbrook, left for the city, and vowed never to return. But when her brother vanished without a trace, something in her snapped. Determined to find out what had happened, she drove back to the town she had tried so hard to forget. When Anna arrived, she was met with cold stares and whispered warnings. The local sheriff, an old man who had seen to many of Atterbrook's secrets, gave her little help. Best to leave it alone, he said, his eyes shadowed with years of unspoken fear. Some things, they're meant to stay buried. But Anna wasn't one to give up. She began her search by visiting the Merrick house during daylight, hoping to find any clue, any sign of her brother. The house loomed large and silent, like a slumbering beast. The windows reflected nothing but emptiness, and the front door hung slightly ajar, as if beckoning her to step inside. Anna hesitated at the threshold, a chill running down her spine. The air smelled faintly of earth and mildew, but there was something else, something metallic, like old blood. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, but the pull of the unknown was stronger. Jack was in there. She was sure of it. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, much too quiet for a place so old and abandoned. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by her presence, and the floorboards groaned under her weight. As she moved through the rooms, she noticed something strange. The shadows seemed darker here, more solid, as if they were watching her every move. And then the whispers began. At first, they were faint, barely audible, like a distant conversation carried on the wind. But as she reached the hallway, where Jack and the others had last been seen, the voices grew louder, more distinct. They were children's voices, laughing, murmuring secrets, and calling her name. Anna, Anna. Her heart pounded in her chest. She turned, flashlight sweeping across the hallway. Nothing. Only dust and darkness. But the footprints were there, small, childlike, leading deeper into the house, just as they had the night Jack disappeared. Following the trail, Anna descended into the basement, a place where no light dared reach. The air grew colder, and the whispers became more frantic. Shadows danced along the walls, taking on grotesque forms, twisting into long-forgotten faces. At the far end of the basement, she found an old, rusted door. It had not been touched for years, but as she approached, it swung open with a low creak. Beyond was a small room, and in the center of that room lay a circle of blackened earth, burned, scorched, and pulsating with a strange, rhythmic energy. And in the center of that circle stood the child, no longer a whispering shadow, but a solid figure. It was a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with hollow eyes and an expression too empty for something that had once been human. They took him, the boy whispered, his voice like a hiss of wine through dead trees. They took your brother. They're hungry. Anna's throat tightened, her pulse racing. Where is he? She demanded, but the boy only smiled that grotesque, unnatural grin. He stepped closer, his feet leaving no prints in the dust, and as he moved, the shadows in the room surged, swirling like a living thing. He's part of us now. With those words, the darkness enveloped Anna, pulling her into its depths. She gasped, feeling 1,000 hands, cold and clammy, grasping at her skin, pulling her further into the black void. For a moment, she saw them, hundreds of figures, children and adults alike, their eyes hollow, their bodies twisted and contorted, as if trapped between worlds. Among them, Jack's face appeared, his expression frozen in terror. Anna screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the shadows. The last thing she saw before the darkness closed in completely was the child's grinning face, hovering just inches from her own. She woke on the floor of the Merrick house, the morning light filtering weakly through the dust-covered windows. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a brief moment, She thought it had all been a nightmare. But then she saw the small footprints leading out of the room, and the soft echo of children's laughter lingering in the air. Jack was gone, but Anna knew now that he wasn't lost, he was taken. The house wanted more, and it wouldn't stop until it was satisfied. The shadows were hungry, always whispering, always waiting for the next soul to wander too close. Anna stood, her legs trembling, but her resolve solidified. She wasn't leaving Atterbrook, not yet. There was something about the house, something buried deep in its history that no one had dared to uncover. The children, the shadows, they were trapped for a reason. And if she could find out why, maybe, just maybe, she could save her brother before it was too late. But as she left the house that morning, the wind carried a new whisper, one meant only for her. You can't save him, Anna. He's already ours. The Merrick house wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. Anna spent the next few days in Atterbrook, poring through old records, speaking to anyone who would listen. The locals were tight-lipped, but she managed to find a few fragments of the truth. The Merrick family had once been the town's most prominent residents, wealthy, respected, feared. But something dark had happened in that house, something that was whispered about but never fully explained. A fire, a death, a curse. The more Anna learned, the clearer it became that the house had been a magnet for tragedy long before her brother's disappearance. The Merrick children had died in mysterious circumstances, and after that, the house had become a place of nightmares. Some said the children's spirits had never left. Others believed the house had taken more than just their lives, it had taken their souls, twisting them into something. Wrong. The pieces began to fit together, but one thing eluded her: how to break the curse, how to save Jack from the darkness that had claimed him. Desperate, Anna returned to the Merrick house, armed with an old journal she'd found in the town's archives. The journal belonged to Mrs. Merrick, the mother of the children who had died. In its final pages, written in shaky handwriting, she detailed strange rituals, desperate attempts to reach her dead children, and one final warning. The shadows are not our children. They wear their faces, but they are something else, something ancient. They feed on the living, and once they have you, there is no escape. The words filled Anna with dread, but she had no choice. If there was even a chance to save Jack, she had to confront the shadows. That night, she returned to the house, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. The door opened without a sound, as if the house had been waiting for her. The air inside was thick, suffocating, and the whispers began immediately, faint but insistent. Anna. Ignoring the chill running down her spine, Anna followed the path she had taken days before, descending into the basement. The child's footprints were gone, but the shadows darker than ever clung to the walls, stretching toward her. She entered the room with the blackened circle, her heart pounding, her breath shallow. The energy in the air was suffocating. She opened the journal to the last page and began to read the incantation, her voice trembling. As the words left her lips, the shadows writhed, twisting and contorting, their whispers rising into a cacophony of screams. The air grew colder, and the darkness pressed in on her from all sides. But she continued, her eyes locked on the blackened earth in the center of the room. Suddenly, the shadows froze. The air became deathly still. From the darkness, a figure emerged. It was Jack. Anna, he said, his voice hollow, his face pale, his eyes those same hollow, empty eyes she had seen in the children. He stepped toward her, reaching out with a trembling hand. You have to leave. Now. No, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I'm here to save you. But Jack shook his head, his expression twisted in sorrow. You can't. I'm already part of them. Behind him, the shadows began to move again, swirling and twisting into the shapes of children, dozens of them, their eyes empty, their mouths stretching into grotesque smiles. The child she had seen before stepped forward, his voice a hiss. You thought you could break the curse. No one can. Anna took a step back, her heart racing. The shadows reached out, cold and suffocating, wrapping around her like chains. Jack's face contorted, his body jerking as the shadows pulled him closer to the other children. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising whispers. It's too late. Anna's body froze, the darkness tightening around her throat. She dropped the journal, her mind screaming for her to run, but her legs refused to move. The shadows pressed closer, their whispers now loud and insistent, drowning out her thoughts. Suddenly, Jack lunged forward, his face twisted in pain. For a moment, his eyes cleared, and he grabbed her arm. "Go, Anna, now, before they take you, too." With a surge of strength, she broke free of the shadow's grip and stumbled backward, gasping for air. Jack's face twisted in agony faded into the mass of shadow children, his body consumed by the darkness. His final words echoed in the air. "Don't look back." Anna ran. She didn't stop until she was out of the house, the cold night air hitting her like a shock. She collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The house loomed behind her, silent, dark. But as she caught her breath, something cold brushed her skin. She turned slowly and saw them, footprints, small and childlike, leading out of the house and stopping just inches away from where she sat. The air grew cold, and the familiar sound of children's laughter drifted on the wind. She scrambled to her feet, her heart racing, and as she backed away, she saw them, shadows, stretching out from the house, crawling toward her. The last thing she heard before she ran was the soft, unmistakable whisper of her brother's voice. "They're coming for you next." And in the shadows of the Merrick house, the children continued to whisper, waiting for their next playmate to join them. They never waited long. The house was always hungry,